welcome to everybody. Thank you. You're a pretty impressive group down there, so we very much appreciate you being here. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders and members attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I need to make a few comments. Please wait until I recognize you before speaking. For those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For interpretation online, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. I ask all participants to be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback, which can be very harmful to our interpreters. Please speak only into the microphone your headset is plugged into. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hands. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. If any technical issues arise, please inform me immediately and we will suspend in order to ensure interpretation is properly restored before proceeding. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October the 17th, the committee is continuing its study of Canadian businesses in supply chains and global markets. We have with us today Canada Border Services Agency, Jennifer Lufala, Vice President, Commercial and Trade Branch. Doug Band, Director General, Trade and Anti-Dumping Programs Directorate. Mike Lay, Director General, Commercial Projects. From the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Tom Rose, Assistant Deputy Minister, Market and Industry Services Branch. Kathleen Donahue, Assistant Deputy Minister. And Scott Winter, Senior Director, Trade Rules, International Trade Policy Division. And from the Department of Industry, Shale Growing, Director General, Advanced Manufacturing and Industrial Strategy Branch. And Department of Public Works and Government Services, Clinton Lawrence White, Director General, and Levent Osamulu, Director General. And from the Department of Transport, Robert Dick, Head National Supply Chain Office by video conference, and Colin Stacey, Director General, and Christian D, Chief Economist, Transportation and Economic Analysis. So welcome to you all. Ms. Lupdal, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Lutfalla, and I am the Vice President of Commercial and Trade Branch at the Canada Border Services Agency. I have with me Doug Band, the Director General of Trade and Anti-Dumping Programs, as well as Mike Leahy, Director General of Commercial Programs. Madam Chair and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the committee's study on Canadian businesses in supply chains and global markets and share with the committee the initiative, tools, and programs that the CBSA administers to support the growth of Canadian businesses. First and foremost, I would like to bring to the attention of the committee that the CBSA has a broad mandate. We are responsible for providing integrated border services that support national security and public safety priorities, while also facilitating the free flow of persons and goods and collecting revenue owed to the Crown. The CBSA enforces more than 100 acts and regulations on behalf of other government departments, ensuring that goods being imported or exported from Canada are compliant with Canadian trade laws and international trade agreements, which includes the proper assessment of duties and taxes owing on imported goods. We conduct regular compliance verification audits and deliver programs on behalf of Finance Canada that support Canadian businesses. For example, the CBSA administers the Special Import Measures Act on behalf of Finance Canada through the Anti-Dumping and Countervailing Program, which helps protect Canadian producers who face unfair foreign competition in the Canadian marketplace from injury caused by the dumping or subsidizing of imported goods. Two other programs we administer on behalf of Finance Canada are the Duty Relief Program and the Duty Drawback Program. While our trade remedy system helps preserve a fair and open trading environment for domestic producers, both programs support the competitiveness of Canadian companies in the global market. Through these programs, qualified companies can import goods without paying duties or may be reimbursed for duties paid on the condition that the imported goods are subsequently exported within a specific time period. The CBSA also continues to modernize its border management processes by introducing new technologies to expedite the flow of goods and people across the border. CARM is a multi-phase project designed to modernize the collection of duties and taxes for commercial goods imported into Canada. It will replace a 36-year-old legacy system, which is at continued high risk of outage. It will help to protect and grow over $750 billion in trade and approximately $40 billion in revenue collected at the border each year. On May 13 of this year, CARM will become the official system of record for the collection of duties and taxes. It will benefit trade partners by simplifying the overall importing process, providing a modern interface for importing into Canada. It will give importers self-service access to their information, and it will digitize paper-based processes and improve consistency with compliance with trade rules. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and we would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rossier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Je remercie le comité et ses membres de m'avoir offert l'occasion d'aborder le rôle crucial.
I would like to thank members for the opportunity to highlight the contribution of our member to agro industries. They play a key part in international food chains by playing a key role in our agriculture.
$9 billion in exports recorded in 2022, marking a 12.7% increase over the year prior. However, we continue efforts to diversify access to markets to mitigate risks associated with concentration of our exports, but there is work to do with 84% of trade currently heading to key markets such as the United States, European Union, China, Japan, and Mexico. Dans le cadre du Partenariat Canada pour une agriculture durable,
as part of the Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture, to ensure growth, competitiveness, as well as building capacities within the sector, acknowledging the challenges raised by the international trade environment with non-tariff barrier obstacles, as well as protectionist policies and different factors influencing trade. Government is collaborating actively with the sector in order to address these complexities.
In priority markets, expanding into emerging markets, and managing risks effectively. The establishment of the Indo-Pacific Agriculture and Agri-Food Office in Manila exemplifies our commitment to strategic diversification efforts. This initiative aims to enhance government capacity in the region to address market challenges proactively and sustain and expand trade with priority markets. Ongoing free trade agreement negotiations, particularly with partners in the Indo-Pacific region, play a vital role in preserving an open, rules-based international trading system and unlocking new supply chain opportunities. Pour renforcer notre présence mondiale, le gouvernement participe activement à des forums multilatéraux.
In order to bolster our international presence, the government is actively participating in multilateral forums, such as the World Trade Organization, as well as the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the G7 and G20, as well as other international organizations.
Que nous avons une chaîne d'approvisionnement robuste et stable, répondant rapidement aux problèmes.
In Canada, Agriculture and Agro Industry Canada ensures diligently that we support our supply chains.
And resiliency through initiatives like the Transportation Supply Office and investments in data efforts. The $4.6 billion National Trade Corridors Fund is investing in infrastructure projects that strengthen trade corridors and supply chain competitiveness. A few investments of note that are supporting agricultural supply chains in particular include the $102 million investment at the Port of Vancouver to increase the efficiency of roads and rail traffic and improve flow to marine terminals, the $100 million investment at the Edmonton Airport in 2022 to increase cargo and logistics handling capacity, as well as the $26.3 million investment to expand and improve the Archer Daniels Midland Windsor Grain Terminal at the Port of Windsor. En conclusion, Madame la Présidente, nos actions visant à favoriser...
In conclusion, Madam Chair, our actions aim at building a resilient agro-industry and agricultural sector, and government is committing to take practical measures in order to ensure that Canadians have access to former and new supply chains in the country and abroad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gronway, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de m'adresser au comité au sujet de...
Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee on behalf of to address our contributions to the global supply chains. Before I touch on supply chains, I would like to point a few opening facts about domestic and global economic contexts.
Industries that produce goods provide high-wage jobs, especially for those who would otherwise earn lower wages. They also contribute to commercial innovation, developing and adopting leading-edge technologies. And they are foundational to domestic economic resilience, growth, and competitiveness, and are material to our ability to attain environmental sustainability. Finally, they are often the nodes by which domestic industry is connected to other markets through R&D activities and the production of intermediary goods and final products which cross borders regularly and often. Aucune nation n'est autosuffisante en matière de fabrication.
No country is self-sufficient in terms of manufacturing. This applies for larger economies such as the US, as well as smaller manufacturing economies like Canada,
whereby with whom a country trades has become increasingly more of a factor in industrial policies and incentive-based investment around the world, and by consequence, this is informing how Canadian business and Canadian industrial policy are situated to respond. The contribution of manufacturing to Canada's economy is in slow decline, falling to 9% of GDP in 2022, down from 15% 20 years ago. While this trend can be, in part, explained by increased contributions of the financial services and real estate sectors to GDP, Canada's industrial outcomes are directly connected to how well we compete for share in our domestic market and in the global marketplace. If our competitors are taking steps to improve their advantage and Canada falls behind, this is and will be evident in our economic performance and quality of life. Even though Canada has lost some industrial ground in aggregate across all industrial sectors, that Canada is a nation of innovators is evident. For example, Canada has a high-performing digital sector that is top of the charts in business R&D, which in turn supports the performance of all other industries and the growth of new sectors like AI and quantum. And while oft referred to as traditional, our aluminum sector is the 4th largest globally and is advancing technology to become the first in the world to smelt carbon-free aluminum. We have a highly innovative textile industry that contributes sustainable, high-quality inputs to many other sectors, such as the auto industry, aerospace, apparel, construction, medical devices, and so on. Canada's largest manufacturing sector, food and beverage processing, is making strides in developing forward-leading products in plant-based proteins, which will help with global food security. Canada's industrial sectors generate 59% of Canada's non-commodity exports and are highly connected to global value chains. But we can be doing better. As Canada continues to make strides to better position our economy and firms to deal with new supply chain shifts and heightened competition, there are several considerations worthy to bring forward to the committee's attention in the context of global supply chains. Firstly, that pay-to-play dynamics are increasing, where access to clean energy and a strong climate regulatory framework could differentiate Canada as a location of choice for investment. Secondly, Decarbonization is an emerging international competitiveness concern, and it will determine market access in the years to come. Thirdly, economic and security concerns are reshaping global alliances and resulting in protectionist policies, many of which can harm Canadian industry. We are not guaranteed protection by our integration in the North American market, but we can make choices that will help support all Canadian industrial sectors in their areas of strength to reinforce their global relevance and competitiveness. Fourthly, there are still gains to be made in innovation and commercialization. If adequate support is offered for advanced technology development and adoption, this will be increasingly significant to competitiveness in a changing environment. Finally, concerns around material and energy security are increasing in prominence. Canada and like-minded countries are seeking to diversify mineral supplies to address growing uncertainty regarding the security of material resources from countries with hostile trade policies. Canada's resource wealth and manufacturing acumen can be the basis to build global relevancy in this regard, while at the same time developing domestic industrial capacity across multiple industrial supply chains. Il semble également regrettable que les conflits mondiaux, au-delà de la terrible perte des vies humaines,
It is unfortunate that international conflicts beyond the terrible human toll that it takes continues to perturb the reliability of supply chains as well as to exert pressures on the costs. The measure of determining these costs is unknown and
for this reason, there are government policies and programs. Without government consideration and support, firms could not address structural issues that limit value creation and growth potential. More than ever, Canada needs to be bold and ambitious, lest we lose further ground to those who are raising the stakes to favor their outcomes and market advantage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dick, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, j'ai le plaisir de me présenter devant le comité au nom de Transport Canada en ma qualité de chef du Bureau national de la chaîne d'approvisionnement. Je suis accompagné de mes collègues dans la Chambre, Colin Stacey, qui fait également partie du bureau, et Christian
Mr.
Day.
Dick, excuse me, Mr. Dick, can you just hold it a moment here?
Yep.
We've got some sound issue here. Just give us a second. Okay, Mr. Dick, could you just say a few words in French for a moment? We check the sound.
Absolument, je peux dire quelque chose, si ça marche.
Certainly, I can say a few words. Is it working?
absolutely I can say something if necessary.
No problem. Hello, it's my pleasure to introduce myself in front of the Committee for Transport Canada as head of the National Supply Chain Office. I'm joined by my colleagues, Colin Stacey, who is also with the office, and Christian Day, Chief Economist and Director General of Transportation Economic Analysis. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
Becomes more connected and integrated, Canadian businesses are adapting to take advantage of the global factory and marketplace. We are also major suppliers of a number of goods that the world depends on, from agriculture and agri-food to fertilizer and critical minerals. As you can appreciate, Canadian producers can't access global opportunities without transportation and logistics operators moving the goods each step of the way. Keeping the transportation supply chain flowing smoothly and efficiently is not only essential for Canadian goods to reach international markets, but it also keeps manufacturing costs down, which allows Canadian companies to price more competitively. For Canadian families, more efficient supply chains translate to more affordable goods that they use in their daily lives. Although Canada's supply chains work well most of the time, we have not seen significant improvements in productivity within the network in recent years, despite growing demands for access to the global marketplace. We have also seen in recent years how vulnerable our transportation system can be to disruptions like the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and geopolitical conflicts. Given that future disruptions and trends are hard to predict, government leadership is needed to bring parties together to build the resiliency of our systems while also working towards more efficient and globally connected supply chains. En conséquence, notre ancien ministre des Transports a nommé en 2022 un groupe de travail national sur les chaînes d'approvisionnement.
As a result, our former Minister of Transport appointed a national supply chain task force in 2022 to consult broadly with industry to improve Canada's supply chains. The final recommendations of the task force on budget 2023 laid the groundwork to establish a national supply chain office. The Minister Rodriguez officially launched the office December 1, 2023, with the foremost goal of increasing fluidity, efficiency, resilience, and reliability of Canada's supply chains through collaboration with industry, labor, other orders of government, and other partners. The work of the office will build upon and further the government's recent investments in trade and transportation systems through the National Trade Corridor Fund and our ongoing effort to reform key legislation underpinning the network, such as through Bill C-33, strengthening the Port System and Railway Safety in Canada Act. Over time, the work of this office will also contribute to advancing other government priorities, including improving the affordability of goods for Canadians, more competitively pricing export goods in foreign markets, and greening transport systems. As we advance the work of the office, our key priorities include providing overarching leadership, coordination, and external outreach to examine and respond to specific domestic and international supply chain issues, including during disruptions. Supporting data sharing and digitalization as part of work to optimize systems and ensure smarter decisions, and developing and implementing a national strategy to drive collaboration across sectors on shared priorities.
This is working to understand the logistical and analytical needs of Canada's transportation sector operators and stakeholders, both geographically and for specific value chains. This includes talking directly to those in the know. Through external outreach, we will strengthen our understanding of what capacity is needed to support major projects, where system bottlenecks are, and what sort of implications regulatory or legislative changes could have on operations. Our engagement with the private sector will ensure that the government understands the industry perspective. To that end, we're also bringing industry expertise on board within the office. Given Canada's position as a trading nation, we fully appreciate the importance of healthy supply chain to the country's economy and Canadian companies' success in international markets. While this work will take time, we will take action on the domestic front to ensure Canadian firms are well placed to connect with global opportunities. I will conclude my opening remarks here and, of course, be happy to entertain any questions. Merci.
On to the committee members. Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things I wanted to talk about, in the opening remarks from CBSA, you said that you're responsible with 100 Acts compliance, including with trade agreements, right? That's correct. That's correct. So that would include ensuring compliance with, for example, the 2020 renegotiated CUSMA or NAFTA. You're responsible with compliance for that?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are responsible for administering. Am I coming through there? Is that okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, we're responsible for administering the custom procedures associated with the CUSMA agreement that was referenced by the amendment.
And so I'm assuming you're aware that in the 2020 CUSMA agreement, Canada is to eliminate from their supply chains forced labor. You're aware of that provision?
Yes, as of July 1st with CUSMA coming into force.
Yes. So that's almost 4 years ago. In 2022, the U.S. Trade Representative, Ms. Tai, had discussions with Canada, and the issue that was raised was the lack of eliminating forced labor from Canadian supply chains. In fact, she said it was a big part of the conversation, and Canada has been repeatedly faulted for failing to do anything to stop these imports. My understanding is that Canada has not seized a single shipment of goods suspected of being manufactured with forced labor since this was signed 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. Is that correct?
So we work very closely with the U.S. Customs Border Patrol because they are
I know you
leaders
work
in this
closely, but
field.
my question is, has a shipment been seized?
So there has been a shipment seized as part of
One.
the pilot. That shipment, in accordance with the way this
It was
prohibition is
returned.
administered, it was released
Yes.
after CBSA recourse
Yes.
worked with the importer to determine that in fact the goods had not been on the balance of probabilities made with forced labor.
So, we'll get back to the balance probabilities. So you're aware that the United States has seized billions of dollars of goods that are suspected of being made with forced labor. And Canada had one, but then returned it. So billions of dollars from the U.S., zero from Canada. Now, you're aware the United States has an entities list where they have companies that they have determined use forced labor. Do we have any similar entities list in Canada?
So CBSA, as a matter of course, does not proactively publish risking information. We do risking at a shipment-specific level in accordance with the ban that's administered under the customs tariff. And we are able to use information research provided by ESDC, as well as information from USCBP and other public information sources.
So do you have any companies that you have a list of that you suspect of using forced labor?
We are aware of entities that are in the public domain that are associated with risks of forced labor. The USCBP list, for example, the withhold release order that you are referencing, is a publicly available list, and as such, we are aware of that list as
Okay,
well.
so can you explain how the United States has seized billions of dollars and Canada has seized nothing? And when I'm going to talk about World Vision Supply Chain Risk Report, where they say that Canada is a significant contributor to the global problem. Canada imported nearly $48 billion of risky goods in 2021, representing over 7.5% of total imports. They go on to say risky imports have increased by nearly 30% by 2016. So Canada's doing an absolutely terrible job seizing goods made with forced labor. I mean, that's unequivocal. The United States found billions, Canada's found nothing. World Vision's calling us out, the United States is calling us out. Has CBSA just not been given the tools like the U.S. Border Service has been to seize these goods?
So I think it's an understatement perhaps, but I'll say it anyways, that enforcement of forced labor-related goods is a significant, complex undertaking. It really fundamentally involves collecting the dots between the labor practices associated with the production of a specific good in a specific area through a complex supply chain, which may or may not be invisible or parts thereof invisible to the Canadian importer themselves. And so each jurisdiction, and there are only two presently who have a ban, ourselves and our U.S. colleagues that have a ban. And
well, Mexico as well. They're part of
me.
CUSMA.
Yes, thank you for the correction. And so the dilemma or the challenge, I guess, fundamentally is in the U.S., they've got a different set of legal and policy architecture than in Canada, and each jurisdiction has to operate in an enforcement context that is governed by those.
So Canada's chosen a different standard for enforcement than the United States.
So
because you guys have to, on the balance of probabilities, prove that the goods were made with forced labor, but the United States has a reverse onus. If they suspect it, the importer has to prove they're not. Is that correct?
So the U.S. system does operate on a rebuttable presumption where the importer has the burden of proof to prove that if goods listed
So why would
on
we
the
use a
resort
lower
order-
standard? Why would we use a lower standard than the U.S. on such a serious issue? It's resulted in the U.S. seizing billions, Canada none.
So it's a different standard that was available at the time of CUSMA. It's important to remember that the U.S. has been at it since the 1930s, and so they have a deep experience base of practices, lessons learned.
We could just use their standard.
And pardon me, Madam Chair? Thank you. And so there is a significant difference in the experience base and the capability and expertise base in the U.S. They are different approaches that reflect the different jurisdictional realities and contexts. We have different privacy and confidentiality laws in the U.S., and so it's not atypical that things that occur in the U.S. are not easily replicable in a Canadian context. So they're different. And you're quite right, the member is quite right, Madam Chair, that Canada operates on a different model under a balance of probabilities where that burden of proof, if you will, is somewhat more shared between the enforcement agent and the importer. So when we detain goods, and we do, and there is the goods are moved off to the side, there's an opportunity for the importer, similar to the U.S., to provide additional information, not to prove that they aren't made with forced labor, but rather to inform the final determination by the CBSA officer as to whether or not on the balance of probabilities those goods have been made with forced labor. So it's a different model. I think there's a lot of experience, and we're very fortunate to have a very close relationship with the U.S. We have regular monthly calls. Their risking team was up, actually embedded in visiting with my team last spring for 2 or 3 days, transferring that knowledge. And we are committed to getting better in this space. And as our information base broadens, we will be able to, we think, get after the risks more effectively. We now are able, the member asked about entity lists, we now are able, in the last 6 months, to be able to start to run a daily algorithm of risks that we can associate it with specific shipments. So we're moving forward. We're not where we would like to be, but we are getting better.
Thank you very much. You're about 2 minutes over your time, Mr. Seaback. Now, yes. Okay, Mr. Sidhu. Well, I think it was valuable information. Okay, Mr. Sidhu.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our officials for joining us here today for this very important study. I represent Brampton East, a large agri-food processing community that supports thousands of jobs in our city, and it's encouraging to hear about the Indo-Pacific strategy and how the new agriculture and agri-food processing or agri-food office that's opening up in Manila, Philippines, is going to help our Canadian businesses access new export markets around the world. In addition, I heard about the National Trade Corridors Fund that's going to enable more trade to flow through supply chains, like the $5 million investment we made at the Peace Bridge. We see millions of trucks cross, 1.1 million trucks cross every year. We see investments through our cargo terminals and ports across Canada, and so that's very encouraging to hear. What I want to know more about is the emerging markets in the Indo-Pacific, because we did hear at the very beginning of the impacts this could have on Canadian businesses. Maybe I can hear from agriculture first.
Madam Chair, thanks for the question. Perhaps I could invite my colleague Kathleen Donahue to join. She may have some additional information, but as the member correctly referenced, we will shortly be opening a dedicated office in Manila to promoting agri-food exports and trade investment in the Indo-Pacific region. There are some very fast-growing, very dynamic economies there. We are in active negotiations on a bilateral trade agreement with Indonesia, as well as the ASEAN group of countries, Indonesia already being $1 billion a year market for us, Philippines in its own right being a very, very significant market. The office will help us both do more proactive outreach into new markets across the region, as well as to deal with the many market access irritants that we have in our trading relationship, both those that are already impinging on trade, and it will allow us also to be more proactive such that we can hopefully work with authorities in importing countries to avoid problems before they become major. My colleagues from Transport may as well have something to add on the supply chain element of the question. Maybe perhaps I'll turn the floor to Kathleen.
Before you do turn the floor, you mentioned a number at the beginning of this in your opening statement in terms of 12% increase over the previous years. Was it $92 billion?
Madam Chair, that's correct. Canada's 2022 exports of agriculture and food products reached $92.2 billion or $9 billion, and that represented an increase of about 12.5% over the 2021 volumes.
Maybe I can hear from Kathleen.
Yes, thank you very much. Kathleen Donahue with Agriculture Canada, Assistant Deputy Minister International. Maybe just to build on my colleague Tom Rosser's point, he noted the work that's been done with regards to free trade agreements to set those frameworks. But the other component of this is to set up an agri-food office in the region, the hub being located in Manila, Philippines. And the idea is that that workforce will be mobile to strengthen our relationships in a fast-growing region of the world, to better represent the sector and hopefully pave the way for greater market access in the region.
Thank you for that. And I'll turn to CBSA now. You mentioned in your opening statement about CARM and digitizing trade and how it'll help businesses access new markets and facilitate the flow of goods. Can we expand on that a little bit? Can we hear more about how this would help?
No, thank you for the question. In today's process, we have under CARM to account for goods coming into Canada after goods are released into the economy. We have a process that's part digital and part paper. So I can submit my declaration saying I'm going to pay duties and taxes, but if I want to change anything, I have to switch over to a paper process, come to an office, present paper to the CBSA. The CBSA has to administer that paper, and it's not that efficient. So the efficiency gain in part is making that entire process digital. An importer can declare their duties and taxes, make changes to the declaration, and then if they want to make an adjustment to the declaration, all digital, and it's all the automation is essentially the efficiency gain. There are other elements of CARM that give importers insight into their account balances, what's going on, make payments. The visibility is directly provided to an importer, so you see what's going on with your CBSA account. Two big items.
I have about a minute left. I'll turn it over to Transport Canada to speak more, maybe in regards to the Trade Corridors Fund. You mentioned $100 million for the port out in BC, $100 million for the Edmonton Airport, and roughly $20 million for the, I think it's the food grain terminal in Windsor. And so these are some of the things that will help Canadian businesses get their goods to market. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit, if you might.
Thank you for the question. The Transport Canada role and the supply chain office role, obviously, as Canadian businesses expand their market, is to ensure that they can be reliable trading partners. And that depends on a reliable and fluid and efficient and resilient supply chain. And the National Trade Corridors Fund supports exactly that. It's an 11-year program with $4.6 billion in federal funding that has leveraged $10.4 billion in total investments in projects across the country, across all modes of transport, to improve the efficiency of the supply chain and the ability of Canadian businesses to trade abroad.
For 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à l'ensemble des témoins pour vos
Thank you,
présentations.
Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here and for your presentations. My question is for the Department of Transport. You held a national summit on the supply chain back in January 2022. A number of speakers indicated that it's important to stimulate financing, public and private, so this private-public partnership that we've heard a lot in the headlines, and we already spoke about 20 years, in key infrastructures, in order to strengthen the harmonization of policies across the government, more specifically when we're looking to take on new opportunities, for example, batteries, but also to promote innovation to decarbonize transportation, to have green corridors, for instance. We know that this has had negative consequences in Quebec in early the year 2000. It was trendy, and a few years later, everybody was very ashamed of this and regretted it. What I'd like to know is this: are there public-private partnerships underway that exist or that are being studied at this point?
Thank you for the question. The National Supply Chain Summit resulted in a task force, which in turn led to a number of recommendations that are being implemented across the Government of Canada. The Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada, in fact, concluded the public comment period just this week, I believe, on the 6th, on a regulatory examination of with public comment from industry on regulations that might be affecting supply chain specifically, as well as border operations. And so that process will launch in terms of then analyzing that input and translating that for analysis and action across the Government of Canada. Other key recommendations included working on identifying new Canada's long-term infrastructure investment needs and different approaches to doing that. And through the federal, provincial, and territorial ministers of transport, a process has been launched in collaboration with provinces and territories to begin that exercise. Additionally, I would note that under the auspices of the National Supply Chain Office, we have launched consultations in an engagement in the Western corridor with operators, with industry, with labor, and also this week in the Central and Eastern corridor, extending from the Great Lakes through to Atlantic Canada, to begin to identify bottlenecks and areas of opportunity and areas of collaboration to improve efficiency, but also as part of improving efficiency, we expect to see improvements to the sustainability of operations. And so we are working to identify areas for partnership and collaboration through those processes across government and through the National Supply Chain Office now.
Donc, il y a une possibilité
So there is a possibility to extend the public-private partnership to a number of different areas. But at this very time, are any currently underway? Are any of these in operation?
I benefit from some specificity on public-private partnerships to do what. There are any number of partnerships with industry that we have, including through the National Trade Corridors Fund to promote more exchange of data, more research, innovation. There are innovation projects underway across government in collaboration with industry, with partners in all across parts of the country, and that includes things like the National Trade Corridor Funds, which themselves are partnerships to develop out infrastructure.
How can you ensure in these partnerships that we're not repeating the situation we saw in Quebec in the year 2000? That is, at the end of the day, we were privatizing profits, but we had losses. In many cases, this led to cost increases.
I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure that I understand the situation that is specifically being referenced in Quebec in that way. We undertake not to.
There
were a couple of cases like the CHUM, MUHC, but this is the Government of Quebec. That's another matter. But at a certain point, it was fashionable, and there were many negative consequences that came out of it. But I want to make sure that in terms of your model, when these partnerships are part of the agreements, that one will ensure that we won't simply ensure that they're sharing between the losses in the public arena and the benefits then go to the private sector.
I think I'm unfamiliar with those specific instances from Quebec. The partnerships that fundamentally we are seeking to advance, many of them are driven around either infrastructure, we've spoken to those, or around data. And the analysis that determines the priorities for us are the ones that afford a benefit to the system, a public benefit at the network level to the supply chain system of the country or of a corridor, as opposed to just a private benefit. There are things we can learn from private operations and innovation that we want to harness to ensure that we take those learnings into the system. But a fundamental aspect of a guiding principle or investments is things that benefit the system, the transportation system.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's quite an interesting crowd, certainly crowd, but it's good to hear from you all. I'm going to continue with Mr. Dick from the Department of Transport and Supply Chain Office. I think you mentioned some of the challenges faced by Canadian businesses in keeping a good, resilient supply chain going. One of them you mentioned, we had an atmospheric river event in British Columbia a while ago that literally cut the coast of British Columbia off from the rest of the country. We lost 5 highways and 2 train tracks. We were cut off. And I'm just wondering how your department is planning for future events like that. What kind of work is the Canadian government doing, and what could it do better, perhaps, to make sure we have a really resilient supply chain, a really resilient transport infrastructure, so that we aren't affected in those ways when these things happen again?
Thank you for the question. In fact, Transport Canada was deeply involved in convening supply chain participants throughout the atmospheric river. And what we learned from that was that, especially when there is a crisis and a public emergency, it is a community in Canada that comes together to do remarkable good and to solve the problems that are in front of them. And Madam Chair, as the member indicated, those problems were many, and they were complex, and they involved basic food and necessities of life into the Vancouver Lower Mainland, into Vancouver Island. It involved animal welfare, energy supply. There was rationing of fuel in the Lower Mainland for the first time since the Second World War. But fundamentally, what contributed to that incident not being worse was the sheer logistical capability of the provincial transportation department collaborating, as it turns out, with Trans Mountain Pipelines Corporation and with the railways to rebuild infrastructure rapidly, and that goes to our resilience, that sheer engineering capacity that was brought to bear. But the other thing was collaboration, and we saw tremendous collaboration, and there was a role from government that we have learned from, and that is a part of the Supply Chain Office's mandate to help convene supply chain participants in times of disruption to figure out collectively how best to mitigate that. And it was through the application of everybody's expertise and knowledge that we were able to get the system up and running as quickly as was possible, and in fact happened. And what we are aiming to do is to systematize that a bit by getting out and engaging with stakeholders across the country through the exercises that I mentioned previously. And a part of that will be trying to anticipate and identify risks to our resilience, to our infrastructure, to the flow of specific value chains, and then to collaborate across government and levels of government to try to work out plans in advance of incidents so that we can mitigate the impacts of disruptions, which of course are inevitable, but through better planning, hope to increase our resilience.
And just sort of at a higher level, what are you hearing from businesses who, used to have, a lot of them used to have really highly efficient, just-in-time supply chains? They've been disrupted by pandemics, by weather events, by foreign conflicts. What do you hear from businesses that you work with about that strategy and how businesses are adapting?
Well, businesses worldwide, you've probably heard of, the shift from just in time to just in case, and that remains a debate that is live globally, and it remains to be seen exactly how businesses around the world and certainly in Canada will ultimately land on that. But there are no doubt going to be some adjustments. In the meantime, what we're hearing from businesses, and it's early stages for our office, but what we're hearing through engagement is a desire to make sure that we can be as resilient as possible, that we can recover as quickly as possible from disruptions, which goes to capacity and agility and coordination, and that we have, of course, the necessary infrastructure in the long term built to appropriate standards as well for the evolving climate risk. And so those are, businesses want to be reliable. They want resilient and reliable and efficient supply chains, and that is their key message to us.
You have 40 seconds remaining. You're okay? Thank you very much. Mr. General, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. hope to get to both Mr. Stacy and Mr. Dick, but I'll start with Mr. Dick. It seems to be the theme of the meeting here. Mr. Dick, are you calling us from the new supply chain office in Vancouver? Is that where you are?
I am at one of our offices. We are a hybrid workforce with presence across the country. I am
Where are
in
you?
Vancouver today.
Is it through Transport Canada? Is that
correct?
Judging by the pictures on the wall. Okay. How many? Do you have an Ottawa office as well? Is that? It says
We do,
Vancouver, Ottawa, and other hubs.
Yeah, so so far we have staff in Vancouver and Victoria. We have staff in Ottawa, Montreal, and I think next week in Yellowknife.
So then, how many staff do you have currently?
We're at about 25.
And your budget's 27.2 million, correct?
Over 5 years, correct.
Right. So then this, getting back to the timeline, this was established as part of the task force report in October 2022. It took 15 months, and I guess in government years, that's technically 12 months, right, Mr. Dick? It took 15 months to get this off the ground, even though the Deputy Minister at one point did say June. You must have misspoke then. It took till December to get this off the ground. You now have 8 months, doing my math, to complete the supply chain and data strategy and initiate regulatory and legislative reform by October. Are you going to complete that by October?
So first, I'd say we launched the office. Minister Rodriguez launched the office on December 1st. I was hired somewhat before that, and we've been going through hiring and recruitment and a lot of engagement and consultation with industry. And so,
but is October, is that doable? Are you going to be able to do that? Get the legislative reform done and the strategy. Calling me a little bit skeptical, but I'm just trying to hear your words.
We are engaged right now with industry on the strategy. We've had our consultation and engagement and working groups launched in the west.
It sounds like a bit of an off ramp, Mr. Dick.
No, I want to.
Is that a yes? Then if it's a yes, then say yes. I'll be happy to invite you back for October.
We would like to, we're going to aim to get the strategy out by then. What we would like to do is make sure that the strategy reflects the needs of Canadian businesses and labor.
Great. So just keeping you accountable. That's all.
Terrible.
The issue of one of the biggest supply chain issues we saw in the last 24 or 12 months was Tylenol with kids. It took the health minister getting involved, and he's the one that his words saving the day on that. Would something like that fall into your office in the future? Are you the hero to kids Tylenol in the future?
The focus of the supply chain office really is on the transportation and logistics system, and other parts of the government will focus on sort of the individual value chains, be that agriculture, agri-food, responsible to them. To the extent that there is the intersection with the transportation and logistics component specifically, we would of course help and be welcoming of being used as a platform by other government departments to help convene or facilitate discussions.
And that'll all be in your. And that'll all be in your strategy that we will see probably before the committee in October, correct?
I won't comment on what's going to be in the strategy, but you'll see the strategy.
Okay, all right, fair. I want to use the last minute to talk to Mr. Stacy, I guess, from Transport Canada. Also, as part of the October 2022 task force report, there was an immediate suggestion to waive 50% of airport rent payments. Has that been done?
Thank you for the question. The supply chain office is not directly responsible for airport rent, so I can't speak specifically to it. What I can say is that there were a number of assistance offered to airports during the COVID period, and since then.
Yes, but since then it has, like 2022. That's past COVID. It sounds like that's a no. Is that it hasn't been waived?
It has not.
It was suggested as immediate, and October 2022 being immediate, and now we're in 2024, and it still hasn't been waived.
No, but I would note that so the supply chain task force did put forward a number of different recommendations. Clearly, we're focusing on moving forward with those where we're prioritizing different recommendations and moving forward on those. But they are recommendations, so we are examining that, and we use that report as a guidance, but it is not a specific list of things that absolutely.
So you're choosing which ones work for you and which ones don't, basically, is what, to sum up your comments.
The report is, it provides guidance for the work we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan, please.
Well, thank you very much to our presenters, all of you, demonstrating how serious your work is in supporting our important supply chains. Madam Speaker, my first question is going to be to CBSA. You'd mentioned in your remarks about dumped products. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and we have the second largest steel producer at Algoma Steel, and a very large, significant producer called Tenaris. And after I was elected in 2015, I was called to a meeting at Algoma Steel, and they're going bankrupt because of dumped steel. And so we set out to, modernize the trade to fight dumped steel. And, in 2016 in the budget, there were measures that were placed in there. And then 2017, things from, distortion, scope, a whole bunch of things that were in place. But one of the things that, we had to do is not just get that on paper, but also have CBSA hire some folks to deal with this. Could you update this committee on the work that the CBSA officers do? And these are the folks that you don't see in the Sault Ste. Marie border that, are securing our borders. They're sort of working behind the scenes. So through you, Madam Chair, what kind of work does CBSA do to intercept dumped steel and as well aluminum?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to get to speak about this program. It's an important one for Canadian companies, and as the member noted, steel is a very significant user of this program. This program it operates under the policy guidance and direction of Finance Canada, under the Special Import Measures Act, and as of 22-23, the duties that we have put in place as a result of our investigations help now to protect 30,000 Canadian jobs and over $11 billion in domestic production. As was noted, the program has been under significant demand. We have currently 150 measures in force, and that represents a 130% increase over the last 10 years, since 2013 to 2023. Steel investigations, not surprisingly, continue to be in high demand. They are our biggest user of the program. From 2020 to 2024 alone, over half of the 41 investigations we initiated dealt with steel products. We are seeing demand from new users as well, less traditional users, for example, in renewable energy, solar panels, wind tower investigations, as well as consumer goods, construction products, and otherwise. The member asked specifically, Madam Chair, what do our officers do? Well, I can tell you that there's really three broad categories of what we do. The largest part of the organization, upwards of 50 people, focus on the investigation work, going out, understanding what's happening in the market, are goods being dumped into the Canadian market, which simply means that they are being sold at artificially depressed prices, lower than that company can actually produce that good and make a small profit in their own market. So they're selling into Canada at a price lower than what they can sell it in their own market, adjusted for profit and accounting and, administrative costs. So for steel, obviously, I would defer to finance in terms of their comments on the global market, but it continues to be a significant priority for us, and we are in regular contact on a number of investigations with steel producers and the CSPA.
Well, thank you for that. It's not only important to Algoma Steel, but also Tenaris Tubes. There was a handful of people working there when I first was elected, and again, it was about the dumped steel, and they're up to multiple hundreds of folks working there too as well, and they're part of like direct and indirect 120, 130,000 people in Canada that feed into these supply chains, especially in the EV car manufacturing, because we are now decarbonizing the steel industry. So and I forgot your name, I'm sorry, I apologize to her, talked about decarbonizing some industries, but the steel industry is also decarbonizing. And could you please provide comment on that and your thoughts on it?
Madam Chair, that's probably me.
That's you.
I can
Sorry,
so-
I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you. So the steel industry is extremely important to Canada. We want to be, the steel industry contributes a fundamental good that bleeds into other and supports other manufacturing. And so the dynamic right now in steel, as was described before, is there's a non-market-based steel economy that's diminishing Canada's market-based steel economy. And what that means is that our market-based steel producers are having a difficult time competing against subsidized steel that's coming into the Canadian market. One of the features that's changing right now in the dynamics of global steel trade is that there's a larger demand and price signal on decarbonized steel. So the auto manufacturers and other clients that are in requirement of steel inputs are seeking out net zero or near to net zero steel. And so for Canada, we've made two significant investments to date, one in Algoma, one in ArcelorMittal Dofasco. And for Ontario, that should total about 6 million tons of GHGs that we are reducing. What that also means is that those steel companies will have access to markets where when carbon borders become a new measure for dividing up countries who are pursuing means to address their Paris commitments and who are trying to address the carbon problem and maintain a high quality product, while at the same time not dealing with the negative consequences of high carbon usually and highly subsidized steel that's unfairly traded in a single market.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cheryl.
On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Ma question ira maintenant à l'Agence des services frontaliers.
My question is addressed to Canada Border Services Agency. During the meeting held in January 2022, there were calls made to examine border measures and to clarify the Border Service Agency in Canada in order to reduce the complexity. Did this analysis, was it conducted or is it still underway?
The question. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of the study that you're referring to. Perhaps you could give me a bit more detail.
Sommet national sur la chaîne d'approvisionnement.
The National Summit on the Supply Chain, which was held in January 2022. Many people criticized your agency, saying that you had to clarify things at the Canada Border Service Agency.
We're going to endeavor to provide you a written response, unfortunately.
No.
I'm sorry?
Parfait, je vous remercie. Donc, vous n'êtes pas au courant pour l'instant si, par rapport aux mesures frontalières.
So you're not aware of this Border Service Agency review with regard to this issue?
Donc, il n'y a aucune
So
manière.
there's nowhere for us to study, to analyze, to review these measures, to counter, to check them and to determine their efficiency and their complexity. There's no way to find out.
I'm not aware of the study that you're referring to.
Peut-être, merci pour la question. Est-ce que c'est dans le domaine de maritime ou c'est dans un domaine?
Is it in the maritime sector, or is it in a specific sector, or is it general? Well, I was wondering whether border measures were constantly reevaluated, whether there was a surveillance mechanism which enabled us to take stock of our work. Well, we have statistical reports on the measures that we have in place, like performance measures for all our modes. We can provide you with reports on standards. So you have a tool and a statistical evaluation, a tool to assess your measures. Yes, these are we have service measures that we follow, and at all points of entry. Who conducts this analysis then? If we're
Port of entry, if that's what we're referencing, those are monitored by the agency?
Excuse me, those are constantly monitored, but I'm understanding that you're referring to an actual report, and I'm not aware of that report, so I'm not able to provide you a response to that. In terms of looking at the measures that we have put in place at the border over the years, yes, those are under constant continuous examination, and based on feedback that may come from partners as well as the public with respect to the impact of those rules, yes, we do monitor that.
Donc, j'en comprends que le ministère des Transports a donc réalisé.
So I understand that Transport Canada organized a summit, received feedback on CBSA measures at the point of entry, and had never gave you a report on this meeting. Is that what I can construe from your responses?
If you can look up and see if you can find that report that Mr. Savard-Tremblay and supply it to the committee, it'd be appreciated. Thank you. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I think there's perhaps a general problem that is full of specific different examples when it comes to supply chains crossing borders. And that's just some lack of harmonization about regulations. One example I've heard from my riding recently was I have a major lead acid battery recycling plant in my riding, all lead acid batteries in cars and trucks and all that are pretty much 100% recycled and made into new batteries. It's actually quite a wonderful system. The trouble is, within North America, when those batteries are being transported, each individual battery is tracked, and it's quite an operation and adds cost to the companies that are doing that. But if they are shipping them out of Canada, say to Asia, they just list them as auto parts, and it's much cheaper. And so it's actually cheaper for companies with used batteries just to send them to Asia for recycling, and we lose all that material, we lose the jobs, and it's an environmental risk. And I'm just wondering, is there part of the government somewhere, I don't know if it's CBSA or Transport Canada, whatever, that looks at those bits of lack of harmonization that actually make things difficult for Canadian companies and the economy in general?
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. One of the areas of responsibility that I have is for critical minerals at ISED, working with NRCan. I believe I know who you're talking about, and the situation that you're describing. We are pursuing in a very concerted way how it is Canada can become a global relevant player in critical minerals, including in the recycling component. Like, just mining them and processing them is one thing, but also the recycling will become a very important input to the entire system. We're alive to this issue, and I think that's one of the areas in which we're trying to figure out what the policy direction process will be to try to address that, because you're absolutely right. We're getting into a market situation more and more in which carbon, high carbon and low carbon will become a market access issue, and countries are navigating their way through keeping resources to themselves that might be better off actually being traded for all boats to float higher. And so there's a market inefficiency, and the carbon decarbonization component is playing into that. And then just cost, right? To decarbonize and to deal with companies who want to have a cheaper end result for how they deal with batteries is one of the market failures, I would say, that we have to address in the system. Sorry if that wasn't very direct, but we're absolutely live to it. We understand the problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Baldinelli, for 5 tight minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. And I'd like to thank everyone for your discussions on supply chains, which are hugely important to us and my community in Niagara. I'm a border community, and trade with the U.S. is vitally important. For example, 75% of our trade with the U.S. by truck goes through 4 main points of entry, those being Windsor, Fort Erie, Sarnia, and Queenston. And 2 of those 4 are in my riding alone. And just again, some of the statistics with regards to the importance of our trade, 25% of what the U.S. exports to Canada comes from Canada. 40% of what Canada sells to the U.S. comes from the U.S. And 60% of what the U.S. buys from Canada ends up in U.S. products, which are sold throughout the world. So, Ms. Latvala and Mr. Dick, you spoke about supporting the supply chain, creating resiliency there. Ms. Latvala, you spoke about the need for modernization to support efforts. I mean, one project that I'm keenly aware was in December at the Peace Bridge in particular, with support from the National Transportation Corridor Fund, $5 million from the federal government, $5 million was put in by the Peace Bridge itself, and about $20 million of U.S. Customs and Border Protection equipment, technology, is being established and put on the Canadian side to scan each truck and collect all pertinent shipment and driver info in Canada while the truck is still in process. So by the time the truck enters into the United States, it just simply shows up at the booth and gets a go, no-go signal, saving tremendous amounts of time. And that was done all in terms of the U.S. legislation, Securing Americans Ports Act. And I believe it's the only bridge in Canada that has that technology at this time. Yet, for every new technology that we have and that works, I mean, this is American technology which is being installed, I might add, there's also concerns. And one of those concerns is May 13th with the implementation of the new CARM project. This Liberal government, to be quite frank, does not have a great track record when it comes to implementing new IT projects, be it Phoenix Pay, ArriveCan. I mean, for example, the ArriveCan, and I'm a tourism community. 40,000 people work in my community in the tourism sector. At one time, ArriveCan ordered thousands of people into quarantine who had no issues or had crossed the border. I mean, it cost $54 million. And to me, ultimately, it destroyed any chance of a tourism recovery in 2022. So concerns have been expressed by organizations such as the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters with this May 13th implementation date. We're hearing perhaps only 25% of industry is registered. Can you tell us what you're seeing in terms of registration for the implementation of CARM?
So thank you for that question. With respect to CARM, as I pointed out in my opening remarks, CARM will replace a system that is at very high risk of outage. We have no choice, and I want to underscore that message. We have to modernize that system with respect to duties and taxes. Now,
I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning the fact that I'm just asking the question, what's preventing people from registering? I'm hearing low registration numbers at present.
I will get to that.
Yeah.
I know that I believe it was last week you had a witness who indicated that we were only at 25% in terms of registration. That was an incorrect number that was provided to the committee.
Okay.
We are at about 57%, and of that 57%, that represents 80% of the importers or transactions into the country. So we are doing well with respect to registration. We're doing more. We have officers who are doing cold calls to individuals who are importers into our country. We have sessions that are happening at the ports of entry so that individuals can get registered and so forth. So we are pulling out all the stops to get people, the importers, registered in time for May 13th.
I was just going to ask, if I could ask this one last question. Have you tested the system with some of those who have pre-registered? So are there tests that have been completed, and what are those test results?
So there have been tests that have been completed, but I am going to turn it over to Mike because he is the technical
Quick
expert.
answer, please.
Yeah, there's testing, there's certification. I think the last time there was mention of the software providers go through a certification. There's 25 of them. One of them is through it, and there are clients testing right now. So we have clients in a CARM environment where they're doing their thing right now.
Thank you. Ms. Fortier, please, for the last 3 minutes.
Alors, moi, je vais aller rapidement. Une de mes
This will be brief. One of my concerns is to make sure that SMEs really have the necessary tools to do their imports or exports. And the regulatory process, I know that we've had some answers on that today, but this is where the paperwork builds up and all the administrative procedures that are heavy. We could always do better. So I would just like to see how.
Comment vite qu'on peut aller pour
I know
faire-
there are some tests, but how quickly can we move to really help SMEs? And according to you, if there are two things that you really need to change now, what would it be? I'll start with Ms. Gormley. I hope I pronounce your name correctly.
Pronounce my name extremely well, so thank you. In some ways, the regulatory question is a product by product or sector by sector question. So it's a very big thing to deal with. So in the domain of life sciences, health products, I mean, that gets very specific in terms of how those two regulatory or other regulatory bodies work, like Canada, European Union, Canada, the United States, et cetera. Food similarly.
So maybe, are we on the right track? Like, are we having the right regulations to help SMEs, or do we need to really focus on those changes?
I definitely, there are questions that are better placed in other departments, that Treasury Board who deals with that, and then I'm definitely not a regulatory function.
I was there
where I am.
before, that's why I'm
That-
asking
No,
through
that's
your
okay. So
department.
can we do better? Always. And in part because things keep changing.
Yeah.
So it's how to keep up and be modern as we continue to.
Maybe agriculture
do
has
things.
some
Juste
examples.
très rapidement,
Peut-être vous
Madame
avez
la
des exemples
Présidente.
rapidement.
Juste un
Very
exemple.
briefly, Madam Chair, there was a test process for regulations in 2018, and there were two other processes focusing on other sectors. And I believe that, as Cheryl described, we have made some progress, including with certain regulations. So the efficiency of regulations will help SMEs, but there's always ground to be covered. There's a regulatory process, as Robert mentioned, focusing on supply chains now.
Est-ce que vous voulez ajouter davantage sur ce que vous disiez tantôt de l'exercice que vous avez fait?
Mr. Dick, do you want to add to what you said earlier about the exercise you did? I want to know if it's going to help the businesses because they're the ones that we want to prosper.
Merci pour la question. It's too
Thank you
early
for
to
the
say.
question.
The consultation period closed February 6th. I think it does speak to some of the questions posed by other members. It will look at border issues. It will look at supply chain issues. That input has just been received, and in fact, some people have been granted extensions, I think. So it's still coming in, and we'll have to churn through that. But I certainly would hope so. We do know that misalignment of regulations, excessive regulations, the means by which regulations are administered creates burden.
So much to all our witnesses. That was great information that we received today. Appreciate you all being here. Meeting adjourned. Okay.